Hey guys, Script over here with another video, and this one should be fun because I came across this video of this guy. I'd never heard of him before, and he's doing this whole big thing about the Jedi and all the problems with the canon and the fact that the Jedi are, you know, in many ways just a straight up contradiction. And what I like about it is that regardless of, you know, I'm going to disagree with him on some stuff. You know, we're going to go over it, obviously, but he does it in a fun way, and I like the fact that it brings up a very real discussion about some of these issues that some people do have. I would argue that some of that is in relation to the fact that things like the Clone Wars have really confused people. And I've said it all along. I said the Clone Wars were ill-advised. They don't, in my opinion, add anything to George's overall approach to what he was trying to say. And that brings me to where this guy sees or doesn't see, because of things in the Clone Wars, that the real story is about morality. It's not about systems and governments and this and that. It's a timeless struggle between good and evil. It's a moral story, the whole Star Wars saga. That's what it's about. And ultimately Anakin becoming immoral and then realizing that love and morality is the right way to go and does the right thing in the end. And one of the big things he also discusses has to do with the prequels and the Midichlorians. And so it is very interesting and fun, and it gives us a lot of fun things to discuss that maybe normally we wouldn't discuss, right? Because I don't generally get these perspectives. I know they exist, but it's fun to hear this guy talk. So let's get into it here, and we'll see what he has to say, and we'll react to it.
Jedis, right?
Okay.
They have these symbiotic organisms called Midichlorians. Now, you could say they're symbiotic, but they're really not symbiotic. They're more parasitic. Why do I say that they're parasitic rather than symbiotic? Well, because when they reach high enough levels in a host, that host loses their ability to breed, i.e. the Jedi have to be celibate. Those infected with the parasite and who follow its will say extreme negative side effects if you attempt to breed.
I don't think that's where they're getting it from. I don't know where you would think that the Midichlorians are the ones dictating to them that they should be celibate. I view that always, and you guys let me know in the comment section, as a response to past issues, a response to trying to maintain purity of mind. It's influenced by monk culture and all this other stuff that George was influenced by. And so to sort of diminish that or sort of say that that's just simply because of midichlorians, I think the Jedi came up with this on their own based on the fact that they knew that if you, for example, fell in love with somebody and that person became so attached to you that you were willing to harm others in the process of protecting that one person. I think that was the whole idea of it. It's no different than any other celibate religion. I think that's where he drew from, where the idea is, and it's not always perfect and it doesn't always pan out properly, but the idea is that because you're not focused on those things and sort of the carnal natures of things, you're going to be geared towards just continuously growing in your, quote, faith or in your belief or in your connection with the Force. I think that was more what it was about. I don't think it had anything to do with the midichlorians. But you're going to see how he kind of views the midichlorians a certain way and how that relates to something that's going on in our modern times, which is an interesting take. I don't agree with it, but it is a very interesting take.
Parasitic organisms that lives in humanoids, they has a hive mind that we call the light side of the Force that they worship. They have to serve the will of it. By the way, it lies to them about its true nature, provably in the Star Wars universe.
Oh, does it?
They have to. Oh, yeah. It doesn't create the Force or anything like that. The Force is. We learn the history of the Force in the Mortis arc. So it is a parasitic hive mind that is lying to them about how it grants them presumably magic-like powers. Then they sort the entire society of the universe into a hierarchy based on your level of infection by this parasite.
God.
I don't think that's necessarily true either, because you could be loaded with midichlorians, but if you don't put the work in, it doesn't really matter. Just the same as if you were a very low level and you put a ton of work in, you could reach heights that maybe somebody with more that was lazy couldn't meet. Hence why they have the temple and the training and all those things involved. I do think that when you get to a level of a, say, Jedi Council member, they would like to see the combination of both the dedication and the discipline to get to that level, coupled with the midichlorian count. And this is one of the things you're going to notice in this video with this guy, is it's all one way or another. He doesn't really have a very nuanced approach to this stuff. I think that's really what the answer is. I don't think it's, oh, you have high midichlorian count, therefore you automatically get to be higher up in the hierarchy. And in fact, the prequels prove him wrong, because Anakin has the highest level of midichlorians, but they don't elevate him to master. They do put him on the council, but they don't give him a master title, despite the fact that everyone on the council has that, because they're communicating to him that, wait a minute, there's still more you need to do. You are not disciplined enough. You haven't proven that you are dedicated to the craft enough to, at this point, get to that level. So that kind of proves that it's not just about how many midichlorians you have. It's both. It's the combination of the two. You need to have those to some degree, but even more important than those, like I said earlier, if you're really dedicated, you can reach a level even without those. That's pretty impressive. It's the dedication and commitment to the craft.
When Anakin went in there, and I'll elaborate on this in more detail, and he killed the younglings, that was a completely justified thing to do within that context. We see those very same younglings in other shots, and I'm talking about like of the movie, like not even like extended stuff, practicing with lightsabers, the single most dangerous weapon in the entire universe. Okay, these are children.
They're not like boken, not stick swords, but laser swords.
Laser swords. They're not even playing with like wooden AK-47s. Now the laser swords are turned down in these.
Okay.
What do you think?
I think you finished your lightsaber.
Find out.
Well, we learned that it's not confirmed in like the movie that they're turned down, but somebody I think realized how bad this looked.
Okay, I do agree that it looked pretty dumb when they're all standing there 4 feet apart with their lightsabers. That's a really stupid way to train them in lightsabers. I will 100% grant that, and I don't know why nobody thought of that. I think there was a way you could easily train them with their lightsabers where you don't even have to involve another student in that. You could practice aiming, practice your form, eventually reach a level where you're trying to block the blasters or using the little blaster ball. Those things to me made more sense. Yes, the way that it was portrayed in the prequels was pretty stupid, but the idea that you wouldn't train a young person with a lethal weapon, I mean, Switzerland, for example, has an extraordinarily low murder rate. They teach kids in school how to use a weapon safely. They have very liberal gun laws in terms of who can own them and stuff. But that's because the people that own them are all trained as kids. Now, I'm not sure if they still do that, but they did that for a very, very long time. So rather than say, this is a horrible weapon, you can't have it until you're so many years old, they say, okay, well, I think they start as young as like 7 or 8 years old. You're going to learn safety with these things. And in fact, we even send our kids to a camp that teaches gun safety. And I'm in Canada, so let alone the States or Switzerland. So I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But I do agree that the way it is portrayed in the prequels, where they're all standing there so close together with these things, that was very stupid. And I think in that case, it was just another one of those, we want the visual rather than thinking about the practical situation that you're dealing with. And that was dumb. But again, if anything, it's better to teach them younger about how to use the thing, rather than waiting until they're 18 and then throwing it into their hands and they haven't really learned anything, and then bad things happen. And we literally see that in the real world.
Of the entire galaxy, because keep in mind, the Jedi act as a secret police force of unelected officials.
No, they really don't. Again, this is a misinterpretation, and some of this is coming from his Clone Wars stance. He loves the Clone Wars, and they do sometimes present them as that, but that is not what they were supposed to be. And this actually will, in his misinformation about this, and again, this is why I don't like the Clone Wars. Another reason is part of the reason why he misinterprets some other stuff with Obi-Wan and stuff like that in the prequels. The Clone Wars did the prequels no favors. This idea that they informed the prequels, I don't know why people think that, because this is the confusion that it causes. They're not a police force at all. They're just supposed to be keepers of the peace, and because they have force powers and stuff, it enables them to do that and potentially, at least, mitigate any kind of harm. Because they, for example, if they walked into a situation where there was some sort of issue between groups or something like that, and this is where they practice diplomacy, those groups know that if they get out of control either side, there's this Jedi there that can literally use the Force to prevent something or to do something. So that's what they're there for. They're not a police force. They're not members of the Senate. They're not cops or they're not. They don't go around arresting people. And the other thing to keep in mind here that this young guy is forgetting is that there was 1,000 generations of peace. So what he saw in the Clone Wars and what he saw in the Phantom Menace was when things started to get out of control. And why did they get out of control? Well, because you had this guy named Palpatine who was manipulating everybody. And they unfortunately succumbed, or not even succumbed, because they didn't know, they were duped. All of the stuff that you see with the Jedi that he's misinterpreting based on an existential situation, an existential threat who had infiltrated and then was an inner threat, and they didn't know about it. But that ignores the fact that for thousands of years they were keepers of the peace, and they did so successfully. Right? We know that. So using this one portion of the timeline to make decisions on how you think this organization is run or what they're meant to do is a mistake, because they were forced into situations they weren't normally supposed to be in, based on the fact that they felt like they were doing what was right, based on the fact that there was this massive manipulation going on and an individual, extraordinarily manipulative, powerful individual, manipulating both sides.
And it's trying to get us used to this idea as a good thing. That it would be a good thing to give your children to the toxoplasmosis people to be raised with their ideology and trained as a child soldier.
He brings up the toxoplasmosis thing, which has to do with sort of stuff going on in our social fabric today, which is how he kind of tries to relate to that, but whatever. But the bottom line is, I'm saying is, he calls them a secret police force or whatever, child soldiers. But again, you're ignoring the fact that for thousands of years, they were keepers of the peace, and they did have a better life. So over that length of time, and 200,000 of them all, or 100,000 of them all over the galaxy, people are going to become aware of the fact that, yes, this is a great thing to be a part of. And yes, I do want my Force-sensitive child to be involved with these guys because they're keepers of the peace. They do good. They're going to have a righteous life, because, again, that hadn't happened for thousands and thousands of years. It wasn't until they got sucked in that they started doing things they wouldn't normally do. Now, having said that, this wasn't like a real child soldier situation, really. There's a few outliers that he brings up, but it's not that cut and dry. It's not like Jedi would bring their Padawan on missions assuming things were the way that they were. They didn't realize the manipulation that was going on behind the scenes, which forced some of these kids into situations that the Jedi didn't anticipate. Because again, when you have 20,000 years of peace, you're probably not anticipating that there's something going on behind the scenes. So this is where the Clone Wars messed with these young people's minds, and they forget all this stuff because they're so focused on these stupid cartoons. And I'm sorry, if you like the Clone Wars, that's cool. But you can see how it kind of messed up the perspective of what the Jedi really were with people and started the ball rolling into this, well, the Jedi were actually kind of bad and the Empire was kind of good mentality because they don't see the Force through the trees. They're missing huge chunks of the timeline and storyline that happened before those events took place.
Ahsoka Tano. The first time we meet Ahsoka Tano on murder missions, by the way, she's 14. This is treated as completely normal.
Well, I mean, I haven't watched much of the Clone Wars. You guys let me know. Were these murder missions, or did things just get out of control and things happen? Now, if they were murder missions, then that's just another reason why I think the Clone Wars is dumb. Because that is stupid. But if they run into a situation where they need to defend themselves, they're going to defend themselves. I don't see any problem with that, and your age would have nothing to do with that, as far as I'm concerned. You are going, if you are under attack, you are going to defend yourself. Now, if you've seen the Clone Wars where she's just outright just walking in and just killing people, let me know. I know she takes out some stormtroopers and stuff. I've seen some of that stuff, but that makes sense if she's under attack. I think there was another episode where she took on some Mandalorians and took them out, but they were trying to kill her, right? So that's not the same thing. And again, they were put into these situations in the middle of this massive war going on between two factions that they, again, had no idea was being manipulated from the inside by a single individual.
One, literally, we know from canon that this is not true. There is one case in which a child is taken. This might be in Legends, but I think it's canon. I'll confirm later in the episode. But taken from a disaster zone when they weren't sure if the parents were alive, and then brought to the Jedi and raised as a Jedi. And then the mother finds out later, and she's still alive, and she petitions the Jedi, and the Jedi refused to give the child back to her, saying that now that the Force has been, quote unquote, awakened in the child, it is too dangerous to give the child back to the mother. So when they say stuff like, well, mothers always consent to this, families always consent to this, what the Jedi are doing is they are basically coming with a trans argument. They say, your kid will be a danger to themselves. They'll be a danger to society. You know, they could join the dark side and we'll have to come and put them down. Basically, if you don't transition, you'll kill yourself.
Yeah, see, he's trying to connect it to that. What he said at the end there. That's what he's trying to connect it to. And he alludes later in the video that's what this was kind of about. Like it was propaganda to start this ball rolling. He alludes to that. He doesn't say that outright. So the Jedi are bad because they found a survivor of this big destruction of this planet or whatever, take them in, take care of them, nurture them, help them to understand that the Force is dangerous, but you're in a safe place, and we will help you to understand how to control it, and if so, use it, but use it in the right ways. And that's bad. That means they stole the kid. Then he says that, but then the mom came back later on, however long after that, and wanted the kid back, and they said no. Well, what are they supposed to say? What are they supposed to say? This mom doesn't know what she's talking about. She's not going to be able to protect this kid if this kid becomes a massive danger to themselves. So the Jedi need to keep this child now that they have them and they essentially adopted them. They were not obligated to do that. They could have left the child there to just rot and die on their own, but they didn't. And so now that the child's under their protection, it would be way too risky to just send them back, wouldn't it? I mean, to me, that seems fairly logical. Maybe a little bit too far, right? You could argue that. But even if you argue that, you're arguing for an outlier. This is a one out of thousands and thousands and thousands of incidences where something like this took place, and it wasn't just simply the parents volunteering their child because of the 20,000 years of peace and what a great opportunity it was.
I literally haven't seen the last Star Wars movie because it looks so bad.
Yeah, to the true fan will not engage with that.
Okay, kudos to both of them for that. That was a wise decision. It's unfortunate that the Clone Wars has kind of warped your mind about all this stuff, but I'm happy you didn't go see The Rise of Skywalker. You saved yourself over 2 hours of your life, and then the rest of your life having heartache about how absolutely awful it is.
Now, I want to make very clear here that this is like extremely explicit in the Star Wars universe.
Okay.
Your level of power, and you as like a casual fan, you are aware your level of power is hugely mitigated by your level of midichlorians.
We've already discussed this. It's but I want to add to that because it's not about power levels. That's what Dave Filoni and modern Disney and all these things have integrated into Star Wars. We see that with The Rise of Skywalker. We see that with Rey, right? It's all about her power level. She defeats Palpatine using power versus power. Whereas in George's Star Wars, it's so much more complex. It's so much more nuanced. Luke defeats the dark side simply by loving his dad and the human side of things, and not with power. If he went in there thinking he was more powerful than those guys, he's dead. And he would have been dead if he hadn't stopped and realized how much he loved his father. And again, the midichlorians can only dictate how much power you have based on your discipline. See, he's all one side or all the other. It's a combination. And just having power means nothing if you don't have the character, if you don't have the discipline, if you don't have all the other things that the Jedi teach. They're not just there teaching these kids how to be powerful. They're mentoring them. They're taking them under their wing in terms of life choices, all those other things, which, by the way, even in the Clone Wars, there's some of that there. There's quite a bit of that. Lessons learned, all those things. So I'm surprised he kind of missed that.
Right, so this isn't like a normal parasitic infection. This is a parasitic infection that through a hive mind is partially influencing your actions. And you have decided to base society hierarchies around this infection.
Okay, so again, they don't base the hierarchy around this, quote, infection, the midichlorians, because we saw that with Anakin. He was denied. They don't represent society. Again, the Jedi have no vote in the Senate. They are only 200,000 people in a wide galaxy. There are cities on planets that have more Jedi, let alone planets, right? There's bazillions and trillions, and who knows how many people in the galaxy. And there's hundreds of Senate seats that represent all of those planets. The Jedi are not the people that dictate society or create societies. Yes, within the Galactic Society, they have developed a hierarchy of their own, but the idea, well, what are you going to do? Not have a hierarchy? How's that going to work? You're just going to have everybody running around, then it's just anarchy. The Empire also has a hierarchy, clearly. In fact, it's not even really a hierarchy, it's one guy dictating. Whereas at least with the Jedi, they had a council, they discussed things, they dealt with things. Palpatine just dictated. He dissolves the Senate. He sends Tarkin word that he's dissolved the Senate. He didn't ask Tarkin's permission. There was no discussion about it. He just told him this is what we're doing now. So, two things. One, no, they don't create the society that they're in. They are they are outsiders who are there to help. And yes, they created their own hierarchy, which how else are you going to function properly? And it's certainly better than having a single guy dictating everything to everybody else.
From Jedi philosophy, they say that midichlorians are the foundation of all life. E.g. that like life evolved out of midichlorians, or they are key to living things. We know from legends, at least from the Yuuzhan Vong, that this is definitionally not true.
Yeah, and this one I agree with him. This was one of the mistakes George made when he had Qui-Gon say that. He said something like the all life comes from midichlorians. That was ill-advised, and quite frankly, I think that was really stupid. That's one of my big criticisms. There was no need to throw that in. Obviously, life exists outside of midichlorians. When Yoda was saying that the Force is in all living things, he wasn't talking about a cell. But that's essentially what George made it when he made Qui-Gon say that. And I think maybe that was part of the reason his sequel treatments talk about how he was going to delve deeper into the midichlorian issue, because he did kind of say that, which is ridiculous. You could say the Force is in all living things because the Force is behind sort of life and binding the universe together and how everything functions. But to say that the midichlorians are in everything or were necessary to create life was really not a good thing to say, and very disappointing. And I'm sure EU fans probably didn't like that either. And it's unfortunate that he put that in. Maybe if we would have saw his sequels, he would have recharacterized that, because that ultimately is pretty silly. If you limit the midichlorians, and this is where the midichlorians don't bother me that much, if they're limited to specific people, and then the midichlorians just help you become even more in tune with the Force if you're willing to go down that path. So then you have both, right? You have the midichlorians and the living Force. When you put them as one thing, oh, it's the midichlorians, then it's just a cell, and I don't like that either. I think that's lame.
We also know how Jedi treat living things that are low midichlorians. What is specifically made to have low midichlorians in the Star Wars universe? Clone troopers. Treated as disposable soldiers. Yes.
What?
But they weren't treated as disposable to the Jedi. In fact, in war, they did what they could to salvage them, but they were clones. They were bred for a purpose. And it wasn't the Jedi who were behind that. It was a corrupted Jedi, as far as we know, Sifo-Dyas or whatever. But the idea that they just thought they were just completely pointless, useless animals is nonsense. At the end of the day, I'll put it to you this way. If they hadn't been sucked into the war and they weren't generals and commanders, then what would have happened to the clones? The exact same thing would have happened. It just would have been under somebody else's authority. So ill-advised to take on that authority, but pretending as if they just saw them that way, as just these disposable things. Let me know in the comment section, is that a Clone Wars thing? Because if it is, I can see why this guy would think that. But that's not how I ever took it. I was just like, well, they are soldiers. They're bred to fight. That's what they're there to do. Why else are they there? Why would you even waste your time if that's not what they're for? Unless you're breeding them to just have a bunch of people that all look the same wandering around the galaxy. And hey, if that's what you're doing, fine. But that's not what they were doing. So they were there to perform tasks. They perform tasks. And unfortunately, some of them get taken out in the process. It's no different than stormtroopers who are there to perform a task. And therefore, some of them are going to get destroyed in the process.
And this is how we know that the Jedi don't worship the real Force. I have never seen anything in the Jedi's teaching that reflects that they are aware of this supernatural mortis plane that defines the Force's true nature. Okay. They say things that you would only say if a parasite was controlling you. E.g., midichlorians are necessary for all life and the foundation of all life.
So you're basing your view of the Force off the Mortis gods, and he goes further in this and even misinterprets that as well. But yeah, again, Clone Wars. Clone Wars mess with these people's brains. And yes, that one line of dialogue from Qui-Gon causes problems, and it was stupid. And so you can see how all these things combine, the Clone Wars, some of the other stuff, have sort of pushed some of these guys into this mindset about the Jedi that is super unfortunate. And, at the end of the day, George is responsible, ultimately, for this stuff. He was there. So it's very disappointing. I don't mind the prequels. They're kind of just satisfactory to me. But stuff like this does cause huge problems. And it causes confusion. It does. And that never should have happened.
George Lucas specifically was involved in the Mortis Arc lore.
Oh.
So he specifically both created the Jedi saying midichlorians are the core thing that matters to all life. That's where all Force comes from. And specifically showed that is also factually untrue. And so the midichlorian hive mind is lying to you.
George, something bad happened to him, because I learned this week that Kathleen Kennedy worked for Lucasfilm.
I love it. She's just like a super casual fan, and she's just super disappointed to hear that. That's actually great and very funny. Well, he'll get into the Mortis stuff here, because in a way, he's right. I mean, George Lucas does the whole midichlorians life thing, and then he's involved with the Mortis arc. So it's like, I think he just I think at the time he just had way too much going on. I've said this about the prequels too, like too much business, too many businesses, too much going on. And I think his creativity and just sort of slowing down, thinking about the lore, take your time, kind of just sort of faded.
The Federation is a democracy, right? Okay, first of the Clone Wars focuses very heavily on one planet's representative. Was she elected? No, she's a hereditary monarch.
Oh, was she?
Princess Amidala.
She was
she's
born
a princess. She's a hereditary monarch.
Should have figured, but I guess
and it's not just her. We see this in the newer. I haven't watched it yet. The one that.
Oh God, and Princess Leia. Yeah, they were definitely nepo babies. Oh crap.
Yeah, Princess Leia inherited her title as princess from her mother. That is a hereditary monarchy.
Oh boy.
So and not only that, the Federation actually has seats, and this is very well established in that it has seats for that are held by people with corporate board positions. Specifically, we know here of the Trade Federation, the Banking Clan, and the Techno Union, but the ones who are running the freaking blockade.
Okay, so I don't think he understands that actually it's a republic, and they mentioned that in the prequels. It's not a straight democracy. It's a representative. It's not a representative democracy. It's a republic. So what that means is that all of these different planets and all these different systems are allowed their own way of governing, and then the overall galactic republic Senate votes upon more broad spectrum issues. So yes, in the United States Republic, you would not be allowed to, as a state, to even vote in a monarch, because that's the system that was set up. But in a galactic situation where you're trying to be cooperative, I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, there's going to be crazy different types of systems in a situation like that, in a spectrum that large, and that many different groups, and that many different planets, and that many different aliens, and everything else, and species. So it would stand to reason that in a galactic republic, you would probably, to keep things level, you would have to work with some systems that have forms of monarchy. How else are you going to do that? But those same monarchs, whether you're Padme or Leia or any other monarchs, if they want to have a seat at the table for galactic issues, they still get one vote out of whatever it is, 200 votes or whatever in the Senate. That's it. They don't get any more. They don't get to be monarchies for the galaxy. They only get to be monarchies for their particular planet or system. You see what I'm saying? So he's misinterpreting that whole structure as well, I think in part because he thinks it's a democracy, and it's not. It's a republic. It is a democratic voting republic, but it is not a democracy.
They are not even planets. They are corporate board members who have a vote in a government alongside hereditary monarchs.
Yeah, and they get one vote. They get one vote out of hundreds. Yep. Yeah, I'm not saying it's great, but that's all they get. They don't get to just run rickshaw over everybody. Now, obviously, in a system like that, there's still a possibility of corruption. And corruption did occur, obviously. That's the nature of the beast. Like, that's the morality that George is presenting. I mean, he talks all the time about how, even a republic, a system like the United States, for example, could become corrupted. And I mean, that's pretty obvious from where we're all sitting right now. You're still dealing with morality. You're still dealing like this idea that you could create a system where there's no possibility of somebody making obscene or gross or bad decision that would negatively impact other people is really just naivety, as far as I'm concerned.
The Jedi, what are they out there doing? They're out there solving trade disputes to keep the money rolling.
Yeah, well, again, they got sucked into what they perceived as a greater good. So they did make the mistake of moving from the peacekeeping end of things to getting involved in these larger issues. But if you watch the films, it's pretty clear they're doing it under the impression that they're trying to preserve the Republic, and they don't want it to fall to the Separatists, and they viewed squelching that conflict as necessary to protect the Republic, rather than just letting it play out and tons of people die, and there's these huge wars all over all these planets. And eventually they had to get involved in that as well, because they thought, again, it was the greater good. It wasn't, the decision wasn't made based on, we want to do bad things. They thought they were doing the right thing, but they were also being heavily manipulated by a master manipulator who was also a Sith Lord. Like, that's the thing people forget. Like, there's Sith Lords like Darth Maul that are pit bulls that just fight guys, and they complete missions, and they assassinate people, and they do things of that nature. And then there's the crazy lunatic villain that doesn't do any of that stuff, certainly not in the open, and certainly not in front of a Jedi or against them directly. He's manipulating everybody on all sides to his ultimate goal. So yeah, ill-advised, but that's a mistake, not a profession or an example of just an evil inside of them.
While in Coruscant, the capital, there is such a rampant drug problem that one of the Jedis gets offered death sticks, like a drug that, I mean, in the branding, it can effing.
Well, that sounds fun.
And he doesn't arrest the guy.
Honestly, though, that just sounds like what a Crunchy Mom or Almond Mom would call pixie sticks. So
I'm pretty sure in that scene, it is obvious that he's a Jedi.
Thank you. You want to buy some death sticks?
So this is a world where in the Capitol, you can walk up to a cop or a secret police and offer them a deadly and addictive narcotic, and they will do nothing about that. They don't even care. It's not even of importance to them.
Well, number one, I guess he could have called the cops. He's not a cop. That's not his job. And the guy looked like he was pretty out of it, so he was probably on it. And so whether or not he looked like a Jedi or not, the guy probably wasn't even considering that. The idea that everybody everywhere is just acutely aware that if a guy is wearing, baggy sleeves, that he's a Jedi, I don't think that makes any sense. And on top of it, again, even if he knew he was a Jedi, he knows he's not a cop, so the worst thing he could do is call the cops. But that's, again, not his job. He's not there for that. He had a specific mission. He wasn't going to that place to arrest drug dealers. He was going to that place focused on finding whoever this assassin person was. So when he has his mandate, he has his mandate. It's not to do what you want him to do. It's for him to do what he's supposed to be doing. So that whole argument just is moot, basically.
A Jedi goes to a Hutt planet. This is how little the Jedi care about slavery. So he goes to a Hutt planet, right? Again, this is as canon as you can get. This is like the first of the prequels. He sees people in slavery. He sees a child in slavery that he wants to take back to the Jedi Order and use as a child soldier, a human weapon. That's why he's excited about him, his high midichlorian count. That is why he frees him from slavery. He frees him through slavery by cheating in a game of cards or a dice game, and then does not free his mother from slavery. He just effing leaves her as a slave.
Well, he didn't just do the dice game trick, right? He also was relying on his instinct that this kid could win this pod race, that it appeared to everybody else around him and involved in the race that there was absolutely no chance he'd be able to do it. So, especially against somebody like Sebulba, I guess he had a bit of a reputation that he might be able to do something, but there was absolutely no way he was going to beat Sebulba. But Qui-Gon Jinn believed in him, so he did the dice roll to get to the point where he could get Anakin out. He didn't get his mother out, but his mother isn't force sensitive. So what we would essentially be saying if we said that he was obligated to get her out along with him is that they should be spending their time freeing slaves all over the galaxy, which again goes back to my earlier point, which is they do not get involved in the systems of other planets. Other planets do things the way that they do them. No one said it's good. No one said they support it, but they don't impose themselves on the way other systems operate. They just don't do that. And if he was going to save Shmi, then you'd be complaining that he only saved Shmi and that the Jedi didn't spend the prequels running around the galaxy saving all these people that were slaves. It would just end up being just this save slaving fest, and that's not what the story is about, and that's not what the Jedi are about. And again, in a republic, when you're dealing with all these hundreds and hundreds of systems and planets, you are going to have to work with what is in place to some degree. You can't force everybody to change to exactly the way you want. You can give them one vote in the Senate, but you can't force them. That was the whole issue.
Yeah, and that was, I think that was pretty clear in the first prequel movie. It's a pretty heart-wrenching scene when they part ways, and they make it seem ethically dubious, I think, sufficiently well.
I don't know about that. It's not ethical for them to save Anakin. It's ethically dubious, even though it's a good thing, because they didn't do this other thing that's also good. So we're saying that if you don't do all the good that we want done, that it's not perfectly ethical. Even if you do something that's good. But the something that's good is ethically good. So this is looking through it through the lens of they didn't do what we wanted them to do. So even if they do something good, if they don't do all the things good that I want, then that thing that they did that was good can't be seen as good. That's not really a thing.
The core point I'm making here, definitely not intended by Lucas. Lucas did not realize that he was writing a script where a secret police force controlled by a hive mind parasite that was lying to people about the nature of the Force controlled the universe.
Well, he didn't realize that because that's not the case. They weren't a police force and they didn't control the universe. They didn't even have a vote in the Senate, my brother. If they wanted to control the universe, they probably would have taken a lot more of them. First of all, there's not enough of them. And that was never their job. That was never what they were intended to do. And again, they don't even have a vote. So they have no control over the universe. They never did. They never intended to. That wasn't what they were for. They were peacekeepers. That's it. And diplomatic peacekeepers at that.
Because now you're not listening to some mystical energy. You're listening to a lying parasite that tells you anybody who doesn't follow the will of the lying parasite is definitionally evil.
Well, if that was the case, then why didn't he just take his lightsaber and stab the guy that was trying to sell him drugs? Like, no, it's not that simple. The only time they view it that way is when they're dealing with dark side stuff, because that is what leads to power and control and corruption to people that have no idea it's even there and have nothing to do with it. That's what it's about. Again, they're not cops. They're not controlling anything. And it's not just the I can see why he thinks it's just the midichlorians, because George did make that mistake with that line by Qui-Gon. But I always viewed it as it's a combination of the midichlorians and the Force combined, not one or the other.
The moment that they realize that Palpatine is a dark side user, not knowing any of his crimes, not knowing anything else, they immediately attempt to murder him, execute him without trial.
Well, to be fair, once they realized he was a Sith Lord, they would have immediately realized that he was doing some form of manipulation. A Sith Lord does not try and take over a galaxy or become a chancellor or do any of those things for funsies or because he's a good guy. The whole idea of being a Sith is to be a selfish, controlling, power-hungry guy. That's what a Sith is. So, yeah, you would assume that, and again, this wasn't just some Sith that's like off on the side, like in some fair weather, whatever, somewhere over here. This is a guy running everything and demanding constant emergency powers. So I can see why Mace Windu would be like, well, so if he's constantly wanting emergency powers, he's overstepping his bounds big time. He seems to be dragging this thing on for reasons we can't really figure out. It's kind of weird. And by then they were very skeptical of him, by the way, throughout the Revenge of the Sith film. So when they find out he's a Sith, it's an automatic assumption that he's been doing things he shouldn't be doing, and he was. And so you could say, well, he should have had a trial, and maybe he should have. But I could also say that, well, I can also see why they would feel like, hey, man, if we don't get rid of this guy, there's going to be major problems.
So you have leading all sorts of troops, people who we know have pod person infections, a parasite that is partially controlling their minds and that they follow as a religion, right? What you don't want to have happen is a civil war, right? Like you do not want a full Jedi-led civil war. That would have been truly devastating to the Empire, right? So you have this small scale controlled civil war, which was done through the civil war with the separatists, right? You get all of the Jedi basically alone with clone troopers. You then execute an order to have all the clone troopers execute them without any real pushback, which went really well. We got it on Order 66 went like Maduro level raid well. Okay? Palpatine and Trump, I see some similarities there. Then you've got to deal with these young brainwashed people at the temple, right? And potentially resetting up this pod person controlling that's an existential threat to the human species. Everything that the Jedi do is just for the betterment of the parasite. It's for the safety of the parasite, and it's for the betterment of the parasite. That's what they're doing when they're doing for the will of the parasite. They find high parasite count individuals, they raise them, and they use them to maintain safety in a universe where this parasite exists.
It's not for the betterment of the parasite, it's for the betterment of the galaxy, and there were 20,000 years of peace. So again, that's the big point he's missing in here. That's that huge plot point. He focuses so much on that one line from Qui-Gon and completely misses the line from Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars. And as far as the kids are concerned, the younglings, they all got killed. They all got killed. Like in Disney Star Wars, they've added a few of them, like Reva and some of these other ones. But they were all slaughtered. So there wasn't what are we going to do with these younglings other than just get rid of them? That's essentially what I saw happen.
We know that they saw action as young as 13 because Obi-Wan canonically saw action as young as 13.
Oh, wow.
Although there is, I mean, that's a child soldier. That is a child soldier.
100%.
We do know of some Padawans being sent into action as young as 10, it appears to be implied. Like if Obi-Wan was sent in and it's not talked about as weird at 13, I would assume 10 at least.
Well, when was Obi-Wan sent into action at 13? Because is that how young he was in The Phantom Menace was 13? Okay, well, let's say he was. They didn't expect to come across what they came across. They had never come across anything like that in thousands of years. So if that's the case, that wasn't because they wanted it to happen. It just happened. It wasn't they were even expecting it. Again, they were just peacekeepers. I don't think they had dealt with any sort of crazy, huge things where they're throwing kids into the wolves or anything like that. Now, unless that is the case in the Clone Wars where they knowingly were doing that, that would just be another argument I would make for why the Clone Wars are kind of dumb, right? Like, so to me, that's just whatever.
Now, let's talk about how they pick children, right? So we know it's typically between 3 and 5. We know that families are pushed with this idea of, it's an honor. They're going to live a better life if they go live with the Jedi. But this is actually deeply messed up if you think about it for like a second. Because what it means is the parasite that controls the Jedi Order and has created this fake religion around itself, that it has created such a ubiquitous understanding in the universe that if you are born arbitrarily with the high level of the parasite, that you will live a better life than everyone else. And this is so commonly accepted that parents will give up their 3 to 5-year-old children to a religious order to live
a militaristic religious order.
Yeah.
Again, they weren't militaristic. They were viewed with high esteem. Like, they weren't giving them over just because they were giving them over. Like, let's say they were just giving them over under the assumption that they were just a military arm of whatever, the Republic. Okay, well, they're still willingly doing that, which would make them kind of the dumb ones. But that's not the case. They were giving them over to a benevolent peacekeeping order that had been around for thousands of years, and they were happy to do so. Again, everything he's saying is framed in the context of this particular event, this particular war that hadn't existed for so long up until that point, that why would any parent have any issue? They would be happy to do that. Like, I don't see why this would be an issue. There are parents today that will, for example, send their kids to a boarding school for sports, things of that nature, because they see talent in them and they believe that they can make it maybe one day, and so they send them to like hockey academies or baseball academies, and they're gone for most of the school year, and no one says anything because it's like that seems like a great opportunity. This would be even to another extreme, right? Because this is like the peacekeepers of the galaxy that have been so successful for so long and so highly esteemed. So why wouldn't they want to do that?
If you say a 9-year-old is too old for the brainwashing techniques that you are using as an organization, those brainwashing techniques need to be severe and systemic. Right? Like, imagine you heard of a religious order that turned away people who joined other than 9 because they usually ended up turning against the order later if they joined as old as 9. They had that much external programming. You'd be like, oh, they're big evil. Right? Like, that would be your assumption, right?
Well, no. The reason that they want to get them when they're younger is so that they don't have issues with past problems. There could be traumas, there could be any number of things that would impact their view of the galaxy. And it's very important when you're setting up a peacekeeping organization, especially one as long-standing as the Jedi, that you make sure to, you could call it indoctrination, but to enter a mind of a child before they've been potentially witness to or been victim of something that would warp their idea of what the Jedi were supposed to be, and not just the Jedi, but the morality, the moral structure of the Jedi, which is missing in this video. He's totally ignoring the morality of the Jedi and just going strictly off of systems and how systems can create people and do this and do that with people. There is a higher moral authority in Star Wars. Again, it's timeless themes. I'm not saying they were right in what they were doing necessarily, because of course with Luke we see something completely different, because Luke was a very honest, moral person. But when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of these kids, it stands to reason that at some point you're going to come across one that has been through too much or knows too much, and therefore wouldn't be acceptable. But this also flies in the face of his earlier point of, well, they have to take them because if they don't, then they'll become Darksiders that they have to hunt later. Well, if they're denying somebody because they're too old, then that person could also become that, couldn't they? And so that doesn't seem to be that big of a worry for them if it's just an age-based situation.
I hate that it's canon, but it is canon. So if we're using something here, they view the Force as the thread, a connective, destiny-binding energy, not a widespread power with light and dark sides. They use collective rituals, which are seen as dark or unnatural by the Jedi. And this escalates to a conflict with the Jedi where they are all wiped out and their children who were Force sensitive do end up being taken. I mean, plausibly by consent by the Jedi, which is really, really shady.
So he's talking about the Acolyte, and yeah, they were Darksiders, and they were doing unnatural things. They were creating life using the Force. Anakin, the Force itself created Anakin. They have no control over that. They don't decide that. But when you got a bunch of witches doing a bunch of rituals to create Force users, that it goes against the natural Force. That's a manipulation of the Force. That's a twisting of the Force, which is, of course, dark side. And as far as all the witches dying, they died because the one daughter burned the fortress down. Like, that's literally why they died. It wasn't because of the Jedi. It was because Anastasia, the mother, had agreed that she was going to send Osha with them, but instead of telling them that, she just kind of stood there, and then when the other daughter rolled up, she turned into this black mist with fangs, and then the black mist started going over to the other daughter, and she looked like she was disintegrating before the Jedi's eyes. So Sol, the Jedi, didn't know what to do, so he stabbed this mist, this fart or whatever, and then she died. She turned back into a woman and died, and then said, "Oh, I would have let you taken her." And then you're like, why didn't you just tell him that in the first place instead of letting it escalate? Which is super stupid. The writing's horrible. And then when the daughter sees that he killed her mother, the one that was turning into the mist, she freaked out, ran upstairs, grabbed a lantern, and lit the building on fire. And that's what killed all the witches. So that has nothing to do with the Jedi whatsoever. That's just a stupid bunch of people. And yes, they were 100% dark side. The Force does not allow you, or it allows it, but it demands that you do not mix stuff like that. It's the same way that the Jedi accepted death willingly, right? Whereas the Sith were always trying to extend their lives, or in Plagueis' case, create life, which is what these witches did, which goes against the natural order. So it's a moral issue. It's violating the natural state of the universe. So yes, they were bad, and the Jedi weren't going to harm them until Dummy didn't say anything and turned into a fart and looked like she was killing her own daughter. So yeah, buddy, like, go back and watch the show. You completely missed that one.
You have the Nightsisters, which are very canon. This is from Clone Wars, which again I think is the best, where they practice a force called magic, a communal ritual-based power drawn from Dasmor's Ichor, green energy myth, emphasizing spells, incantations, and sisterhood bonds over individual Midichlorian infection. They do not talk about Midichlorian infections. As far as I know, there's no instance of the Nightsisters saying that the Force works through this organism that infects people. They actually appear to have a truer understanding of the actual Force than the Jedi have of the actual Force. And more people in their society appear to be able to use the Force than is possible through the parasitic mechanism that the Jedi use.
If you don't see that these witches, like, moving their hands around like they're holding crystal balls and doing dark side magic, like, for example, keeping Darth Maul alive and giving him new legs and helping him to survive with no bowels and no, like if you don't see that as an unnatural act that the Force never intended, that they just did, then I don't know what to tell you. Like, that's what they are. They make zombies, which is, again, completely unnatural. That's the problem, is it's violating the natural order that the Force has created. And I don't understand how you don't see that. The symbolism is so clear. Now, for my money, I will say, and I've said before, I can't stand the Night Witches. I hate the fact that it's just regular, stupid, generic magic we've seen in 50 million other things. The fact that the Force was different and mysterious and didn't bring in generic magic is what made Star Wars cool, and what makes, in my opinion, the Nightsisters terrible. And it just diminishes what Star Wars is. But alas, they are definitely doing things that are unnatural and that the Force doesn't want, and that they have to manipulate it to do it. So basically what this guy's saying is that if you have the ability to manipulate the Force to do things that it never intended on, that you're therefore, like, better than the Jedi and have a more true view of the Force. Okay.
So they have powers that we do not see Jedi have, like the ability to resurrect the dead, e.g. the zombie argue in Clone Wars, terraform, become invisible, pulling from what Jedi call the dark side, but without the Jedi suppression of passion. So keep in mind, they're able to do all of this without suppressing emotion, passion, or reproduction.
Do you not see, dude? So not only do they resurrect the dead, they resurrect them into psycho zombies. I don't know if you haven't seen, like, a lot of movies or read stuff, but that's pretty, like, they're making it very clear that these people are not good. I don't know how you don't see that, and I don't know how you would use that as an example of a truer usage of the Force. Terraforming, so what does he mean? Like moving the Earth around? Again, that's not a natural thing. Moving a rock is one thing, but terraforming is a whole other ball game. So again, I don't see how you don't get it, and they're certainly not tapping into the good parts of the Force to do that. They're literally manipulating it to do that.
The Nightsisters have none of those limitations, and yet can perform many things with apparently little effort that the Jedi cannot do. I don't know how else you explain that than that their understanding of the Force is simply truer or better than the Jedi's if they don't have these extremely severe limitations and yet have as much power.
Okay, so first of all, it's not about power. You keep saying that. It's not a power issue. It's a right versus wrong moral issue. And of course they're able to do more than the Jedi easier. That's what Yoda says to Luke. It's easier and more seductive. It's the lazy way. That's the whole point, right? It's the lazy way. It's it's the same thing with anything in life, right? Timeless themes. You've missed the whole Star Wars thing. Is that, it's easier to be a Darksider because you don't have to put as much work in, and you don't have to adhere to certain limitations morally. You just do what you want, and it's easier, and you can become more powerful in a shorter amount of time. All of those things are true. That's what makes it unnatural and wrong. That's like literally the whole point.
The Jedi, upon seeing them, their first thought is the fact that they see the Force differently than us makes them dark side, thus an existential threat. Thus, we need to exterminate them. And they do, in many cases, run extermination campaigns against them.
Well, no, it's not that they see it different than them. It's that it is dark side. That's literally what it is. And that poses a threat to people. When you got witches making zombies out of dead people and all types of other things, that creates a huge threat because they are going to use it for their own wants, not for the greater moral good. Again, you're missing the morality of the process.
But they're not all bad, as we see. The Ventress works with the Jedi on multiple occasions.
Yeah, and I mean, that's part of the problem with the Clone Wars. That's part of the problem with the video game there with Marin or whatever her name is, where they make them not so bad, right? There's this blurring of the moral lines. Although in Marin's case, I would say she's using the Force magic in positive ways. So in her case, it's maybe, you could argue more okay, but this is why they never should have put stupid generic magic into Star Wars. It just muddies the waters and makes it stupid. Ultimately, yeah, the Clone Wars and Disney Star Wars, and this is what I've been saying since the beginning. The Clone Wars was the beginning of the problems. It just muddies the waters, creates this moral ambiguity, and that does a very large disservice to the story. And also, as you can see with this individual, completely confuses people.
If you want to get into the Mortis arc, as it's called, they're the floating diamond-shaped planet that appears to be otherworldly, outside of our reality. There's the father, which represents balance into the Force. He's an ancient, dying entity trying to maintain equilibrium between light and dark. The daughter, who embodies the light side, selfless, harmonious, life-giving. And the son, who embodies the dark side, selfish, destructive, and powerful.
It's the Star Wars Trinity. This seems like an unhinged arc. Who wrote this?
I think George Lucas did based on drug trips. Is from what I've heard.
Yeah, so on the one hand, you say it's like the Clone Wars is the best thing ever, but then at the same time, it contradicts stuff that George wrote, and then you say George is on drug trips. Here's the bottom line. Yes, the father was the equilibrium, but he made it very clear to the son that if he uses the dark side, it's going to create problems, right? So it's there, but it's not meant to be wielded. And he does wield it, and it creates huge problems, right? He tries to kill the father, ends up killing the daughter, major problems, and then it leads to the father offing himself, if I'm not mistaken. I haven't seen it in a while, because the equilibrium is off because he used the dark side. That was my interpretation. So I still go by what George has said all along, which is balance is light side dominance. When you start twisting and manipulating the Force with the dark side, that's when you fall out of balance. That doesn't mean you can't have a daughter and a son, but again, he's looking at things so all or nothing or left and right, and he's missing the nuance of this whole thing. And the unfortunate reality of it is a lot of Clone Wars fans miss that as well.
The Force's actual will is to maintain balance, but that doesn't seem to be what the Jedi want, and that doesn't seem to be what the Midichlorians want. The Midichlorians want only the light side to win, right? The Jedi who are following them repeatedly attempt to wipe out the dark side, and yet we know from the Mortis arc that the reason why the Mortis arc is done is they're basically testing Anakin as the person to bring balance. So they are testing him as a person to bring dark side back to the universe.
Is that what the Mortis gods are doing? Because I don't know. I saw that a long time ago. Is that what they were doing? Is getting Anakin to bring back the dark side? I don't think that's what they were doing because Anakin killed the son. How does that work? That doesn't make any sense. No, the Mortis God arc to me is just he kills the son, and then he takes over as sort of the balancer, the quote father guy, which means yes, he's balancing it, but he's not promoting the dark side. He's still the balance is still light side dominance, which again George Lucas has professed many, many times. And this is a massive misinterpretation that the Clone Wars started. Disney Star Wars has facilitated. You remember Snoke? Oh, darkness rises, light to meet it. And I'll say this again, like I've said a million times. If the Force wanted dark to rise if light was there, or light to rise if dark was there, then what's the point of the Star Wars? What's the point of the Jedi-Sith conflict? There's no point. The whole story is useless and a waste of time, because all that means is that, oh, well, the Emperor's dead, so now darkness has to rise to meet the light, and it's just this never-ending fight, which is really, really stupid and wrecks the story.
Now, you've got this light side infection, so why did the infection choose the light side to attempt to help its spread and safety within the universe?
Why?
Well, because if you are a cloud-based infection, right, that's simply the easier side to use to control people. The dark side, because it's so competitive, because it is, so power hungry, is not going to listen to you as effectively. How do you argue to them, well, listen to the voice in your head, when they're like, but the whole point of the dark side is not to listen to the voice in my head?
No, that's totally wrong. The dark side's easier because it tells you to just simply listen to your impulses and the voice in your head. Listen to your instincts. The Jedi are the opposite. They have to fight against their urges and fight against just doing whatever they want, and have to have discipline. That's literally the whole point. That's what Yoda teaches.
Now, let's talk about the Empire, because the Empire was presumably so evil, right? What made the Empire evil? Well, the Empire operated on a human-first strategy, which I don't see as necessarily evil. Like, I'm a human, right? Like, they're trying to brainwash us into liking the other, when in truth, many alien species had treated humans systemically unfairly.
Well, and that's the whole point. That's the easier path, right? That's easier to just say, I'm picking my team. I'm not going to try and use diplomacy and try to figure out a solution so that we can all work towards harmony. We may never get there, but we're working towards that. The easier thing is to say, well, I'm pro-human. That's my number one. And yeah, sure, aliens sometimes treated them bad, so therefore I have my excuse to do so. It's the easier way rather than doing the Jedi way, which is to try and work with all these different groups and try and form solutions. Yes, of course, if you're using the dark side, if you're a Sith, we're not working with you because you're too far gone now. But as far as the galaxy is concerned, the different races, all the different people groups, that was their whole methodology, which is a more difficult thing to do because you're dealing with so many different viewpoints and worldviews and all those other things. Whereas all the Emperor thought was, oh, I'll just do what I want, which is just this easy thing. Oh, yeah, I'm just going to prioritize these people. That's it. Screw the rest of you. I don't care. Furthermore, I think he's not realizing that in canon is the storyline of Operation Cinder, where if he ever died, he was going to have a contingency plan to literally destroy every planet that the Imperials controlled using these big, whatever, plasma thingies, the satellite things in the atmosphere or whatever. So he loved the humans so much. It wasn't because he was just a selfish piece of crap that wanted power. He just loved the human species so much that if he couldn't have the power, he wanted them all dead.
But the point being is the other species had systematically disadvantaged humans using their genetic differences, right? Like, why shouldn't humans fight back if they have the power to? We should just wait till we're eradicated?
Just roll over and take it, huh?
Yeah, roll over and take it? No. And I will point out that the Empire did not just dispose of all non-human species. Many non-human species serve some of the most senior roles in the Empire.
Well, that's true.
The great one here would be Grand Admiral Thrawn.
And you think he's doing that because he cares about aliens? No, he did it because he could use them. Everything he did was to use people. He even used the Jedi. Maybe the fact is there just wasn't that many aliens that were willing to be used. Maybe that was the issue.
So the Empire would elevate you if you had competence and you weren't a human and you didn't show yourself as actively hostile to humans.
Yeah, so in other words, I'll use you if I can use you, but if you don't agree with me, I will dispose of you. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay.
The Empire also had much less corruption than the Senate. We see several figures talk about this, even figures who do not like the Empire.
Yeah, people talk about it, but that's not the actual reality of the case. It was deeply corrupt, more so than the Republic. Again, I go back to earlier in the video. At the very beginning of Star Wars, what does he say? He's dissolved the Senate. So there was no oversight. He had control over local governors, and the Empire would engage in bribery. They partnered with criminal organizations. In the video I didn't show, but he says, oh, well, they made it so the Hutts were more, they accepted things better. Okay, there's outliers, but overall, they were extraordinarily corrupt. It was established right off the bat. It was all about him, Palpatine, making people do his bidding. And he involved all types of things. One way to describe it is that the Republic was corrupt due to bureaucratic ineptitude, right? I would agree with that. Whereas the Empire's corruption was insidious, driven by greed and ruthless authoritarian structure. His name is Darth Sidious.
You were brainwashed into hating them.
Yeah, you were brainwashed. So again, this completely ignores all morality, all natural law. It's just all about like systems that characters and people create within the universe, and they're the only arbiters of anything. It's nothing to do with the Force being a natural thing. It has nothing to do with a moral code or any of those good things. It's all just about systems, and the Jedi are as corrupt, if not more corrupt, than the Empire, because the systems is what matters. Who cares about the fact that after Return of the Jedi and the Emperor was killed and the Empire fell, that literally all the different planets were celebrating, cheering on the fact that this ended finally because it was a corrupt, horrible mess? All that to say, I don't know if this guy's being a devil's advocate. I get the impression he actually believes what he's saying. I don't know if he does. Maybe he'll find out about this video and respond, because all of this is very just a weird interpretation of what we all saw. And I did this video because I think there's a lot of people that think this way. I've seen them online, and it all started with the Clone Wars, and the Clone Wars needed to be much better at defining things. They left things way too open-ended for people to come up with these strange interpretations that go against some of the things that George has said, and just sort of general clear observations of what we're seeing on screen. The Clone Wars really screwed a lot of people's up in their brain, and then of course that went into Disney, and it's been a complete mess with Filoni heavily involved with everything. Like I said earlier, I will give... it's totally true that George should never have put in that line with Qui-Gon and the midichlorians, or the essence of life or whatever. That was really dumb. But other than that, this is just a gross misinterpretation of the entire saga, essentially. Although I am very proud of him that he did not waste his time with The Rise of Skywalker. All that to say, guys, this is very interesting. There's a lot of topics here. Let me know in the comment section what you think. If you like this content, please like, subscribe. Always helps the channel. Feel free to check out anything else on my channel. Have yourselves a really good day.